Hello, everyone. I hope your Monday is off to a good start. Those of you that don't know me, Randy Boyd with the Courageous Healers Foundation. Change your life story now. Here, just wanted to talk about my book, Healing the Wounded Child Within. We're going to get into chapter 3 today. Trauma triggers. Trauma triggers, which is a big issue in the recovery world. And not even in the recovery world, just a big issue, period. A lot of people react on things and they don't understand why, and it's because they've been triggered from something in the past. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. Morning, Alex. Just got back from 3 days up in Big Bear. Had the tour to Big Bear bike ride up there. It was a very nice weekend. The weather was absolutely perfect. I wasn't in the shape I was in last year, so the ride was a little bit harder, but it was still fun. I had a lot of friends up there and family. And hey, Bob, good morning. A lot of friends and family up there, and made it a good time. So my granddaughters, and so all the people I ride with here in the desert made it a lot of fun to get out of this hot heat down here in the desert for a couple of days, about 80, 85 degrees up there. Hey, Danny, morning, son. So we are back here in the desert, and we're going to start the week off. We're talking about trauma triggers, chapter 3 in my book. A lot of people don't understand what trauma triggers are. I can remember being in treatment, they'd always talk about your triggers, and they talk about triggers that would make you drink or use again. And they didn't really explain the fact that it was a trauma trigger. Like one quick story on how a trauma trigger might work is, I can remember talking to Betty Ford one day, a group of outpatients. And there was a gentleman in there, a young man in there, good-looking man, married 3 children, and he had been sexually abused. And I gave him my card when I left. 3 months later, after he got out of Betty Ford, he said he talked about his trauma and just talked about it, dealt with it. He thought it was over with. And something happened when he got out, and we triggered him. We triggered some feelings that came back up, and he didn't know how to deal with them, so he ended up drinking, which that's what we do. And that was his default button, because the alcohol or the drugs will take away our pain and our shame instantaneously. The problem is it'll be there the next day. I worked with him for about 6 months and tried to get him back on the right track, and he just couldn't do it. And 2 years later, he hung himself. So these trauma triggers they're tricky. They're really tricky. They come up subtly. It's not just about the drinking or the using. It has a lot to do with the emotional part of it. So when we're in treatment or when we're working with somebody, it's important that we understand these trauma triggers and that we learn how to work through them. Because our default button, for many of us, the default button is drugs and alcohol. And that is not what we want to do. We want to learn how to work through these trauma triggers. So just a little story on that to start off with about how bad about how bad these trauma triggers can be for us. Last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the inner child, repairing the inner child. But one of the things we've got to be able to do in order to heal that inner child is we must be able to identify what our psychological or our trauma triggers are. What a trauma trigger is it's any current experience that sets off distressing memory of a painful past experience. It can be an image, a sound, a smell, or a combination of 2 or more stimuli. I'll give you an example of one that I had right towards the end of writing my book. You'll hear in a second. Other emotional responses. When we're triggered by these emotional responses, they can appear to be inappropriate to the circumstance. So the abused child within us expressing emotions that has been repressed for months or years, perhaps even for decades. So you could be having a perfectly normal conversation with somebody, and all of a sudden something said, a look on the face, some kind of body movement, a smell, anything, and all of a sudden they're acting inappropriately for whatever the conversation is all about. Here's an example of what happened to me in 2015, right towards the end of my book. I was paying the bills like I'd always done back then, and we were tight on money, so I asked Kathy to come into the office and go over them with me, and she just looked at me, and her typical response in life has always been, everything's going to be okay. Well, I didn't want to hear that. I wanted her to sit down and go over this with me, and she said that everything's going to be okay, and she walked out of the bedroom or out of the office, and then went and sat down and read her book. When I got all done paying the bills, I walked out and simply said, Kathy, I don't like the way that conversation ended. Can we please talk further about it? She says something so innocent and so simple, and she was just setting a boundary with herself from all of her quota work, and she just simply said, Randy, not now, but later we'll talk about it. Well, when she said that, hi, Carrie, Jim, when she said that, I lost it. I absolutely went berserk. I popped a nut. I went into a blackout rage, screaming and yelling. I couldn't figure out. It was bad. Just let me tell you, it was ugly. When I was finally able to calm down, I set aside myself and I asked myself, what in God's name did you just do? And why did you react a way that all she did was say, we'll talk about it later. It's because when I heard Kathy say that to me, it wasn't it wasn't Kathy that I heard. It was my mother's voice that I heard, because my mother used that language all the time. And when she said not now, later, basically meant never. Carrie, glad you're joining us from Canada. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hey, Chris, what's up? So it was a trigger. I got triggered. Something that Kathy was perfectly innocent in what she said. She was reading her book. She didn't say no. But when I heard that as a kid for many, many years, it never meant no. Later meant never. And so that's one of those trauma triggers, and an inappropriate response to a circumstance that should have been, okay, well, when you're ready, let's sit down and talk about it. It was a real simple solution. So as we're repairing ourselves, we have to make a space for our inner child to acknowledge his feelings instead of repressing them. So when we're going through this, we want to make sure that we're with people that understand us, because we don't want to start repressing these feelings again. After that incident, I went to Kathy and we sat down and we talked exactly what happened. And so, yeah, it wasn't pleasant what happened, but because Kathy knows what I was going through, my recovery process, she knows I'm working a lot of stuff. When I was able to sit down with her and explain to her what happened, she really understood it at that point in time. So, it's important that when these things do happen like this, a trauma trigger does happen. There could be different things. I'll go over a few more here in a minute. It could be a whole bunch of different things that are going to trigger you, but to be able to sit back and realize what happened, and then go to that person and have a conversation with them about why you acted the way you acted. All it is a response to a trigger that happened to you when sometime in your trauma space as a child. So just be aware of it, and honor that inner child inside of you, and make sure that you give him the opportunity to speak about it rather than repress it, because that's when the problem. Repressed anger. That's exactly what happened to me. It was repressed anger, because I can never express how I felt when I was a kid. So we want to let that inner child, we want to be able to express how we feel in an appropriate and healthy manner. So it's important too to talk about this with people, like I say, that can understand, because we don't want to create more problems for ourselves going through this. So you might not be able to express yourself to the person that you acted inappropriately with, because they just won't understand it, and they can just say, I don't really care what your problem is. What you did to me is rude. And you shouldn't treat nobody like that. So that's where it's also important to have a good mentor, a good sponsor, a good coach, or even a pastor that can understand what you're going through in order to help you through that situation and not shame you through it. We don't want to be shamed through this, okay? We're learning to be better people. And I'm reading a comment here real quick. I need to answer this one. It's a great question. As a matter of fact, the question is, so whenever those triggers come up, let the child vent, of course, in a healthy environment. Yeah, Alex, like you and I do all the time. Just like I work with you, and you don't necessarily Well, when a trigger hits you, and I reacted, I didn't even have a chance. They're real subtle, and it just comes out of nowhere and it hits. And so that was an inappropriate way to behave. Had I been able to catch it earlier on, then I could have prevented the whole thing. Gone and talked to a mentor, my sponsor, or spiritual counselor, or even talk to my wife because she understands me. But if, in the fact, you do what I did, then afterwards you can sit there, and if you have a partner that understands and you talk to that person why it happened. If not, then you come to a mentor or a coach or somebody that understands you and your journey. It's very important because a lot of people don't understand this stuff, and they'll give you quick one-line answers that are just generic, and there's more to that than just one-line answers. This needs to be looked at and understood. And we need to be able to talk the person through the trigger and so that they can understand what happened and maybe find out where it came from. Because if we might know why we're acting the way we're acting, but if we don't know what caused the why, how can we fix it? That's a big question. We don't know what caused the why, then how are we going to fix it? Well, it's great. I got triggered and I blew up, but what's causing it? Because until I know what, I'm not going to be able to fix it. Generally, it's not the trigger that's the frightening part about it, because like I said, it's really subtle and it just comes in. And the experience that provokes the trigger isn't necessarily based on the present reality. It's always based on our past trauma. And they're subtle. Like I say, my wife told me that answer countless times before. I mean, countless times before. Not now, later. Not now, later. And you're right, Carrie. They do need to know that they matter. I'm just reading some of these comments as I go. I really appreciate you guys' participation. Parents do need to know. I mean, children do need to know they matter. Children's voices do matter. But the reality is that the trauma's from our past. And like I said, Kathy's had that conversation with me countless times before. And this one time, it just triggered me, and I blew up, and I can't tell you why. But the good news is that after I settled down and calmed down, I went and did a little meditating, spent some time by myself, I found out where it came from. Kathy's not my mother, she's my wife, she's my best friend. But at that moment in time, I can see. I wish I could explain. As I'm talking to you, it's a mystery how that happened. It really is. So that's how subtle these triggers can be. And they feel overwhelming. They feel overwhelming, and they take us by surprise, and that's exactly what happened. It's just when they hit, it's just like boom, they come. I don't know if anybody's had those anger blackouts where you get in a rage and all of a sudden, or you get so upset that all of a sudden you can't control it. It's just so overwhelming. Well, that's kind of what happens with the trigger. It's overwhelming, it takes us by surprise, and we can't control it, especially when it hits us by surprise. It could be as easy as a romantic partner coming up to you, and by touching you in the same place your abuser did constantly, it send you into a traumatic stance. So, your partner, I mean, maybe you're holding them, you're kissing them, you're touching them in a certain way, and maybe you've done it for a long time, and over again, and then one day maybe it's just a certain feel, a certain smell, a certain touch, maybe it just feels a little different, and all of a sudden they go in a traumatic trance, and they just start going down. Get away from me, don't touch me, It's like, I don't want you around me, and it's like, you try to figure out, well, I've done this countless times before. We've been romantic like this, and it's just me. I love you, So it's again, it's that overwhelmingness, and it's surprising. It just comes out of nowhere. And what they do is they start spiraling down the rabbit hole of shame. They're emotionally and physically wiped out. Another way is you walk into a room that smells like the one where you were most often abused. Now, it could be sexually abused, physically abused, emotionally abused, spiritually abused. It doesn't matter. So I want you to take that into consideration when I say abuse. I know I had the whole gamut. A lot of people have also, but you might not have been sexually abused, but none of us escape our childhood without some kind of trauma. So you might walk into a room, it smells like one where you're most often abused. You go into hyperdrive. If I smell Brute, that's what my stepfather wore all the time, Brute, and I don't like smelling it. You know, people getting right up in my face, I don't like it, and I have to usually I have to tell the people to back away, because they're all trauma triggers. It's just the way it is. What happens is your entire body tenses. When you go on higher alert, you go on alert for danger, or even unintended sarcastic comments can send you into a past memory of an emotionally abusive situation in your childhood. Sarcasm is something that we all need to remove from our language, our communication skills, because I can tell you right now that, you know, I grew up in a sarcastic home. My wife grew up in a sarcastic home, and it's caused a lot of pain for me, and it caused a lot of pain for Kathy as well. And Kathy is now, she's working on her sarcasm, and I lovingly call her on it when she does it, because it can be pretty brutal and pretty stabbing. And I can remember one of the couples in AA. I was working with a kid, with a man, and him and his girlfriend were getting ready to meet his mom. The girlfriend was getting ready to meet his mom, and I was teasing her all day. We were being sarcastic, people that I was sarcastic with all the day, all the time. And I said something, not realizing that she had a real issue. And later that day, Kathy and I are driving to Santa Barbara, and he called me up to say, "Randy, my girlfriend's been crying all day long since you talked to her this morning, and we were talking to her, teasing her about my mom." And I go, "Oh my God." I didn't know, but she had real issues with that. And here I am being sarcastic, and I sent her into some shame stuff. So I had to call and make amends to her. So, you know, sarcasm is wicked. It's mean. And it might be, "Oh, I was just kidding." No, you weren't. You weren't just kidding. If you said it, you weren't kidding. Okay? It's a great response and a great way to get out. But be careful with your sarcasm. You never know what anybody's going through or what they've gone through. Okay, so we got to be very careful. If people would just treat people with kindness and love, we'd be a lot better off, you know. But I can remember when I was in Betty Ford, you know, I would tell my story, and after I would tell parts of my story, I would laugh, you know. And my counselor, Melissa, looked at me. She goes, "Randy, why are you laughing?" I go, "What do you mean, why am I? What are you laughing at?" "I'm not laughing." "Randy, you're laughing." So I was laughing on the outside, but on the inside, I just wanted to disappear. And it was a defense mechanism. I really didn't realize I was laughing. I was just telling a story, and when I got done, I would laugh about it. And it was just a defense mechanism to make it seem lighter than it really was. And the reality is that if we're abused in any way, it's not a light subject. Now, I understand that some people can grow up in the abusive homes as children, but they learn real quick. They have people in their life to support them. They get through it at a fairly quick age. But a lot of people, especially a lot of people in recovery, they're suffering greatly because of the abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and spiritual abuse. And alone is enough, but then add sexual abuse to it, and you're in real trouble. So here's a list of a few examples of triggers and conditioned responses they can set off. Okay, your list will be unique, but the triggers below are often mentioned by survivors of sexual abuse. So, smells. Yes, smells such as alcohol, perfume, cigarettes, cigars, lotions, candles, burning wood, and charcoal or incense. Okay, sights such as wallpaper patterns, shoes, clothing, and pictures. I think there's excuse me. I think there's an excerpt in my book from Survivor Speaks Out, or somewhere I read it, where a person, it was a wallpaper in their room. They had that same wallpaper in a house they lived in as adults, and it triggered them every time they saw it. So they had to remove the wallpaper. The shoes. Here's a story about some shoes. There was a lady, an older, adult couple, and they were having sex in bed, and when he came in, he put his shoes right next to her bed, right? And so when they got all done, she went to the bathroom. When she came back in the bedroom, she stepped on those shoes and she flipped. She just lost it. And she started screaming at the guy, get out of my room right now. Get out. What are you doing here? You can't be here. You need to get out. What? And the guy's yelling, but my clothes. Get out. I don't care. You can't be here. But what had happened is that when her dad would come in and molest her as a child, that's the exact same spot that he would put his shoes next to the bed. And when she stepped on them, it triggered him. It had nothing to do with her partner. It all had to do with that trigger. Okay, so we got to be really careful, right? So somebody's acting that way. A lot of times they're not doing it just because they want to be mean. They're doing it for a reason. They can be sounds such as car engines, car exhaust, car horns, train whistles, music, and TV programs. Certain music, I like to go back and listen to the music I grew up with, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Led Zeppelin, all that. And oftentimes that music can put me back in places I was back then. And they're not bad places. It puts me back when I was surfing in the water, or certain things I was doing when I was having fun. So, but it can also trigger some memories of some bad memories. I had a problem for a while taking showers, probably just a year ago. I would get in there and I'd smell the water. It reminded me of my stepfather. I really struggled. I don't even think I told anybody about that, but I really struggled with taking a shower for a while because it just triggered me. It was weird, but it just triggered me. And then also anniversaries such as birthdays and holidays. So these can all be triggers. I mean, how many people around birthdays or holidays, how many people just you kind of see them disappear into themselves, kind of isolate, They're not doing it because they hate the family. There's situations going on in their life that around that time of the year, a lot of people struggle. My house around the holidays was not fun. It was not fun to be around the house at all when I was a kid growing up. So we gotta just be aware of all that, okay? It's important to be sensitive to our own triggers and to treat ourselves with compassion when we are triggered. And so that's important. Kathy and I work with couples and the people we work with, and that's the one thing we do with them. We teach them. Sorry guys, I'm really tired today, having a hard time talking. We teach them to be kind to themselves when they get triggered. It's okay. They come and they talk with us. We go through the whole thing. It's like you guys are growing, and you're gonna get triggered. And the important thing is that you're here sitting down with us and you're talking to us about it. It's not a bad thing. I'm glad you're recognizing that you're being triggered. So have some compassion on yourself. Give yourself some grace. Look how far you have grown. We always remind people, look how far you have come. Look how much you have grown. Okay? You're not sitting at home stewing over this. You're sitting with us talking about it, which is a good thing. And you're going to be fine. Just beware of your triggers, and more are going to come up. Basically what a trigger does, it's like experiencing the trauma or the abuse all over again. I mean, it can freeze you right dead in your tracks. Because it's a lot of them, it's just as though the trauma's happening right there in your face. And that is like the incidents with Kathy and the bills. It was as though my mother was sitting right there telling me, no, we'll talk later. And because I never could say what I felt when I was a kid, I said it that day and it wasn't pleasant. So I'm just glad I got it all worked out, and Kathy and I are both on this journey together. And she wasn't happy, but she, as usual, we talked about it and got through it, and she knew I'd be okay. So basically what a PTSD flashback is, a mental re-experiencing of the traumatic event. PTSD flashbacks can be indistinguishable from present reality. Triggers can feel as traumatic as the original injury. My stepbrother was in Vietnam, and a lot of war vets, and that's what a lot of people think. Well, I didn't go to war, I don't have PTSD. Well, I didn't think I had PTSD, but I did. But the Winter Nationals, and the car blew up, and he ducked. He grabbed my sister. He grabbed everybody that was with him in the stands. We weren't there. I was told about everybody that was in the stands around him. He dove over the top of them, covered up, because it was he was back in Vietnam. Okay, and that's exactly what it's just. PTSD takes you right back to the event. You feel it. You can almost smell it. You can almost see it. So Again, PTSD is one of those things you need to be diagnosed with. So I'm just telling you my experiences that I've had with it. I'm not going to sit here and diagnose you with anything. Okay. So the trigger can feel as traumatic as the original injury, and that's the hard part about it, because it's hard to distinguish the two of them. So that's a little bit about what the trauma triggers are and can be, and some of the stuff they can cause. So next week we will talk about some ways to communicate with these to others about these trauma triggers. That's going to be a real key to this, is that once you recognize them, sitting down and being able to communicate, like I say, with your partner, with your friends, or whoever it is. If you're in a healthy relationship, that, hey, I just got triggered. Even if it's a sexual relationship and everything's been the same, and all of a sudden, bam, being able to tell your partner, hey, it's not you, this is me. For some reason, I just got reminded of what happened to me when I was a kid. Okay, or there's a lot. There's just so much involved in it. So we'll be talking about that next week. Okay. At 11 o'clock on Monday, I'm really working. I'm doing this every Monday at 11 o'clock unless something comes up. Also, you can visit the website, courageoushealers.org to see what's going on there. We do have our first annual golf tournament coming up, September 21st. If you go to courageoushealers.org, you'll see the golf tournament tab on the top. Simply click on that, and you can register right there. There's a register button right at the very top of that page. It's $75 for before August 21st, and $85 after that. And includes it's a 2-man scramble, 4-man teams. 7 o'clock shotgun start. You'll get range balls, prize pool, 2 drinks, and a taco lunch bar. So lots included. Plus, you're going to help a great cause, and we're working on getting raffle prizes as well together for that event as well. So if you can, you want to support a cause. Oh, we're also looking for hole sponsors. $100 a hole. You can sponsor as many holes as you want, but it's $100 per hole. We'll get you a nice sign with your logo out there on the holes. As far as when it comes to life coaching, check out my life coaching page, changeyourlifestorynow.com, changeyourlifestorynow.com. I do coaching from anything from abuse to marriages, all sorts of addictions, all sorts of stuff. Kathy and I, we counsel couples together. So if you're a couple that want some counseling, reach out to us and we will be in touch with you and see if we can get something going for you. Also, my book, Healing the Wounded Child Within, you can get it on Amazon and paperback, Kindle, and now available in audiobook. And also, I'm in the process right now of putting together a podcast. We just now started it. It probably won't be live for a month or two, but if you guys want, these things are for you, not so much for me. I want to help people heal. So when it comes to the podcast, it's probably going to be called the Healing Courageously podcast. We're going to want to hear some stories or about healing. If you guys have any topics that you'd like us to talk about, just shoot me an instant message, and we'll do our best to do it. So, but again, we're just starting to get it together. We're doing all the paperwork. It'll probably be a month or two before I get it out there, but I'll let you know when I do. Okay. So, everybody have a fantastically good week. If you're in the desert, stay cool, because it's supposed to be another hot one. I think today it's supposed to be 117. Thanks, Mike. Wow. Thank you, Mike. That's great. I really like hearing that. Appreciate that very much. So if nobody tells you they love you today, Randy does, but more importantly, God does. Love you all, guys. Have a super blessed week, and thank you so much for joining me live today. I really appreciate it. Bye-bye.